to It's in the Cards. Hope everybody's enjoying the spring weather like we're having here. I have a very special show this evening that I am so excited to be able to have. It's actually a series. It's the first of two parts. As most of you are probably aware of Donald Michael Kraig. And also aware that on March 17th of this year, he passed away. He lost his fight with pancreatic cancer. The episodes that I'm doing this week and next week are in dedication to him and his life. And I am so pleased, honored, and excited to be able to have Holly, his wife, with me, joining me, and we're going to be discussing the whole entire Don's life, her wonderful life with him, some memories, questions that I know all of you have that are burning to know, as well as the time leading up to when they found out the diagnosis. And that time period up until the day that he passed, and how Holly has coped with it all, with support and help from all of the fans out there, and lots of things in between, and some shocking things possibly for you as well. We're going to, this week, we're going to discuss all of this as much as we can get to. It's going to take more than the time that we have, so it's going to be in two parts, and I'm not going to open up the phone lines this evening for you to speak to Holly. If you have questions or anything as we're discussing things, feel free and type them into the chat. If you're logged into the chat room, you can do that. We'll take some questions that way. Next week, when we continue, we will continue where we leave off and open up the phone lines for you then, so that you can personally call in and pay your respects to Holly, ask your questions, interact with, or whatever you would like to do. We're going to do that next week. Yes. So I don't want to waste any more time. I do want to. There are some people out there that probably are not aware of who Donald Michael Kraig was. So I'm going to give a brief rundown of both Don and Holly, so that you are a little bit familiar with the two of them before I bring Holly on. Donald graduated from UCLA with a degree in philosophy. He studied public speaking and music at the university level. After a decade of personal study and practice, he began 10 years of teaching courses in the Southern California area, and he taught topics of Kabalah, tarot, magic, Tantra, and psychic development. He was also an author of many books, and he was a member of many spiritual and magical groups. So Holly had a whole lot of support here behind her, helping her through this. She herself, besides having been married to him, she is a lecturer and occultist, a yoga instructor, certified massage therapist, certified NLP practitioner, a psychic, and Reiki practitioner. Holly, hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for doing this. I wanted to do this show, and I had made contact with you, and we had discussed that. I just didn't even debate whether or not to contact you, if it was too soon, if enough time had gone by. I just instinctively, one afternoon, sat down and was lining up shows and the guests doing emails, and I said, I have to get a hold of Holly. Now's the time.
And if I remember correctly, it was the most appropriate time, Misha, because I had just been in Don's office throwing a hissy fit because I was so ticked off at the universe that I was feeling so lonely, so left out, and so many people had been saying, Holly wanted to give you space. And I was so tired of that. I was so tired of people giving me my space. I needed my community. I needed my folks around me. I come back to my computer 15 minutes later after my hissy fit, and there was the message from you. So the universe provides.
Yes. When it's meant to. And
Absolutely.
it said I had no qualms. Normally I'd be like wondering, is it too soon? I don't want to upset. And
Right.
none of that. It was just get a hold of Holly, now's the time, and just sat there and typed to you.
And I think that would be a Don thing. And that's one of the things that I've noticed is that Don may be physically gone, but his presence is still physically around me and helping me break through a lot of barriers and a lot of roadblocks and coping with a lot of what's going on. So as a pagan, it's so comforting to know that he's here, and
Right.
knowing as a medium as well, he is here. He always stands by my right shoulder, and I've always had anyone else who's connected to him, I've asked, which side of your body does he stand on? And they always say the right. So that's a pretty powerful message for me.
Yes. I knew I had the privilege about 5 years ago or so, maybe 6 years now. Time goes by, doesn't it?
Yes,
when I was doing radio elsewhere, and I had the privilege of having him on as a guest, and he was always so down to earth. What you saw with Don is what you got. He didn't put on airs, he didn't put on acts,
Right.
because he was in the public eye. He never let it get to his head with an ego, thinking he was better than anyone, or none of that falseness about him at all.
Right. He was very humble. When I first met him, I honestly didn't know who he was. I didn't know his importance in the community. I met him as Don. But as time went on and I went to events with him and I met people who admired him, studied under him, took his classes, I found the profound humbled by the fact that people would actually read any of his books, much less buy them, much less come to his classes. He was just so humble through the whole process that I think that kept him grounded and didn't allow his ego to get inflated.
Right. So, since, you brought up when you met, you want to share with everyone that encounter?
I might be missing something.
When you met Don?
Yes, when I met Don.
Yes, since you brought that up, would you like to share that story with everyone, how you met?
Absolutely. This is my favorite story of all times. It's a prime example of how I can put my foot in my mouth and yet still walk out smelling like a rose. So Don and I were at an event at Raven's Flight in Hollywood. It was a wonderful pagan shop that unfortunately no longer exists, and at least in the incarnation that I know it in. And after the ritual, Don and I found ourselves talking, and we were talking about sleight of hand magic, because he was a sleight of hand magician in addition to being all the other things that he was. And he was a member of the Magic Castle, and I said, I really love sleight of hand magic. And he says at some point, why don't we go to the Magic Castle? And I didn't know what the Magic Castle was. I'd only been in LA for a year and a half, and I had no clue. But as these next words fly out of my mouth, I also realized, watching a PBS documentary on the Magic Castle, so I realized I was insulting him when I said, the Magic Castle? What's that, your bedroom? and he burst into the biggest laughter. It was this big, huge belly laugh, and I didn't insult him at all, and it was so much fun. So we continued to laugh and laugh and laugh. And later, later on, my confidence slipped. And I thought, well, why would this amazing man want to talk to little old me? And so I started to take a step backward and go find a cigarette, because that's what I do when I get stressed out. So I started to take a step back, but I felt a hand on my right shoulder, and I heard a voice in my head, in my ear, say, no, you need to stay here, and you need to talk to him now. And I did one of those, look around, who's there? There was nobody there. Nobody there. And because I found the confidence again to stay there, he and I started dating immediately. That night was our first kiss, and that was October over 10 years ago.
Wow. And here you are.
Here I am. Here I am. Yeah.
So would you say that's one of your favorite memories, or your all-time favorite memory?
That's probably one of my all-time favorite memories, just because there was so much magic wrapped up into it. Later on that night, I actually had to ask him to quote, be my boyfriend, because there was this young man who wasn't going to leave me alone, and he kept hitting on me, and he was drunk and whatever. So I turned to Don and I said, for tonight, could you please pretend to be my boyfriend? And he immediately went into this beautiful, sweet, protective mode. And little did I realize, that's when we really became boyfriend and girlfriend. It was just so sweet. It was so quick and so fast, and so endearing. Yeah, but after 10 years, there's just so many amazing memories. One of the things that was a constant theme throughout our relationship and our marriage is I had problems working in the corporate world, and I would come home all stressed and tensed and ticked off about what was going on. And I would tell him about the day, and bless his heart, if he didn't use this phrase that made me want to strangle him. He said to me, well, Holly, it's interesting you choose to think that way. And one night, I remember saying to him, so angry, and I almost screamed it, how else was I supposed to think, Dawn? How else am I supposed to do this? And he says, well, Holly, that's a really good question. I'm like, oh, for crying out loud. So he was always encouraging me not to take it at face value. His big thing was think for yourself and question authority. He started that at every workshop he ever did. And he believed in that, and he instilled that in me as well. He wasn't my teacher. He wasn't my high priest. He wasn't my therapist. He was my best friend and my husband. And he was definitely there as my support and my guide for all those years.
Would you say even when you fought, it was magical? As much as fighting can be magical?
Well, what's interesting is when we first moved in together, I had a lot of self-confidence issues where, I didn't have a lot of money, and the belongings that I had were important to me. But when we blended our things together, he had a lot of things that were better than my items, and I took great offense to this. And I remember one fateful day, I was so ticked off. I don't know what he wanted to get rid of. It may have been a spatula, as simple as a spatula, but I had it. And I remember screaming and yelling at him, standing on my tiptoes, screaming and yelling at him. And he just let me do it. He let me rail against the system. And once I calmed down, he and I talked a little bit more clearly about it. But over the years, we got into this great pattern of, hey, Dawn, what you just said, I'm feeling, and then we'd fill in the blank. And we would talk about it much more detached than emotional. And that was part of the neuro-linguistic programming that I went through actually with him. So he and I created a very interesting dialogue. So we didn't necessarily fight as the years went on, as much as we recognized the disagreements that we had and what was ticking us off at the moment. And I even alerted him when I was feeling hormonal, when I realized that I'm kind of off balance for whatever reason. And so that kind of really beautiful open conversation created a great foundation. So I felt comfortable saying to him very, very sincerely, dude, you're ticking me off.
did he have, being a writer and things, and, you know, he has books that he's written, did he have certain designated times that he just locked himself in his office and don't bother?
No, he didn't. He was one of those freeform writers that when the inspiration hit, he'd go write. For instance, when he was doing the 3rd edition of Modern Magic, my joke is I lost him for 9 months because he was always in his office working and pounding it out and researching and you know, trying to make it all work together. And he would occasionally throw a chapter kind of out the door and say, hey, check this out. And then he'd close the door again and he'd go back into his office. When we first moved in, he, bless his heart, he wanted us to have a system where if one of us needed to be left alone, no questions asked, that we would put a hat on. We would wear this hat around the house and we would be left alone. And I looked at him, I said, Don, we're adults. We can tell each other when we need to be left alone. So over time, we figured out a system without wearing hats, thank heavens.
Right. That's funny. We're gonna end up, we can reminisce the whole hour away.
I know.
We'll end up losing time. Let's jump ahead a little bit to when he was told of his diagnosis. And
that was the fateful day of December 23rd, of 2013. But let me back up a little bit. He had been having some digestive problems, and I'm not going to kowtow the whole or put down the whole entire medical industry, but it takes time to get appointments with specialists. It takes time for lab results to come in, and by the time all was said and done, on December 23rd, he checked himself over to a clinic, an urgent care clinic. They rushed him over to the hospital because the pain that he was talking about that he was having in his upper abdomen could have been an indication of a heart problem. So at the hospital that he ended up in, which was amazing, you know, thank you, Providence, Holy Cross, they did a CAT scan or a CT scan, and that's when they found multiple lesions of various size from 3 to 4 centimeters from his pancreas to his liver. So by the time he was diagnosed later that week officially, he was already at stage 4 with metastasized pancreatic cancer of the most aggressive form out there. And it it sucked. It blew us both away.
You went with him to when he went to the urgent care, correct? He didn't just take himself. You went with him, and were you called into the doctor's office, or
It was in the ER. It was in the ER that we heard it, and but that was the beginning of the test. So we kind of figured out on December 23rd that he had some form of cancer. They checked him in immediately into the hospital, got him upstairs into a room, and we met with his oncologist from the City of Hope, which is also on the Providence Holy Cross campus. And she immediately jumped in and talked about the various options. And that week he started one form of chemotherapy. And that's when I started my education of understanding bilirubins, liver function, it was a crash course in internal medicine.
I bet. And then on top of it, I guess, were you Googling and looking things up to just absorb?
No.
I
absorbed it. I didn't, because diagnosis by the internet really adds more fear to the situation. And I needed to trust the team of doctors and nurses that we had. And a lot of beautiful, wonderful people, after I posted on Facebook in the Heal Don Kraig group, a lot of beautiful people came forward and said this is what they had learned and this is what they had.
Right.
We lost Holly. We'll get her right back.
Did we lose her completely?
Yeah.
Okay.
She's back.
Sorry about that. I'm back. It
okay.
Was Yeah, there I am. It was very clear to me that the doctor that we were working with not only knew what she was doing, but she also had contacts with the latest research groups out in the City of Hope main facility here in California, and was working with her colleagues that week to figure out what could be done, what were the options, and she really hit the ground running, and so did the rest of their staff, and they did their best to educate us. They did their best to wasn't going to go, that we could hit remission. And so he and I started doing magic and started doing energy work and NLP thinking, that we're putting out the thoughts that we want to put out in order to receive the energy that we want. And I think that's really sustained him for as long as it did, much longer than the Western science said that he would live.
How long had they given him?
Well, that fateful decision didn't come to me, or that fateful moment didn't come to me until February 20th, 2014, when I was in the hospital room. I barely left the hospital room. He wouldn't let me sleep in there, so I went home at night, and I guess you can call it sleeping. But the nurse came in and asked me to step out of the room. And anytime a nurse comes into the hospital room and says for you to step out, you need to grab your cell phone. Just remember this, because I didn't, and we had to sneak my cell phone out later. So my doctor, or his oncologist, was on the phone, and she had looked at his lab works.
Holly, did we lose you? Yes, we did.
I'm back again.
There you are.
Yeah, point blank, that he had, and this was over PantheaCon weekend, so there was a big, huge love fest going on up there. So I attribute what was about to happen to the love and the energy work that was done up there. She told me he had a couple of days to a couple of weeks to live.
Now, this was the nurse.
No, this was his oncologist on the phone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was the oncologist that was on the phone from the nurse. And I mean, what do you do? What do you do? I was immediately surrounded by nurses who handed me tissues as I'm on the phone, and they're holding me while I'm talking to the doctor. And the doctor coached me through what needed to happen next. And it was decided by the end of the phone call that I would tell Dawn the diagnosis, or the prognosis. But I waited a few days because I wanted more lab results. I wanted to see how the weekend would go, and I wasn't ready to tell him. It was the following Wednesday that I went into his room, I closed the door, and sat on his bed and asked him, it's still, sorry about that, it's still very tender for me to talk about, but he said, yeah, and I phrased it in this manner, because Don and I know that Western science is only good as it can be. It's not perfect. So I said to him, Western science believes that you have a couple of days to a few weeks left to live. And of course, Don wasn't one to cry unless it was a really good chick flick. And he cried, of course. He burst into tears. We cried for a long time. The phrase, "this freaking sucks," it replaced for
Misha, did I lose you too?
I'm here.
I'm back. All right, so we've been hoping all this time that he was still going to get into remission. He had problems with the bilirubins, and the fact that his liver was so riddled with tumors, that it wasn't processing the chemo or anything else for that matter. They tried to put in stents to open up the flow of the bile going through the liver, but when they did that, it was bumping up against other parts of the liver and closing off.
Right.
Or said that he was going to pass on. I kicked into high gear. I had already been working on his getting his affairs in order, and creating the living trust and doing all that kind of fun stuff. And he was actually let go from the hospital a few days later under the idea that he was going to come home under palliative care, meaning he wasn't going to die and we would get a lower level of care, but that he would be at home to rest and to hopefully do another care of chemo. What I didn't tell him at that time was it was really hospice. We knew there were not going to be any more chemo treatments. I didn't want to break that spirit that he had, because
you lost her?
Yeah.
Coming back.
Here she is.
all right, here we go again. So it also happened at that time on the February 20th, after I caught my breath for about 30 seconds. I immediately called my office, went on federal medical leave and California state family leave, called the rest of my family and said, get somebody out here, get somebody's. And yeah, so they all came out here, and it was 4 weeks after the diagnosis that he ultimately, or less than 4 weeks after the diagnosis, that he ultimately did pass at home.
Now, what, I can't imagine, being in the position that you were, that you had to tell him.
Oh, no spouse, no one should ever have to tell their loved one that they're going to die. And I can't tell you the amount of anger that I have about having to do that, having to deal with cancer, and then on top of that, having more angry at all.
Now, I know, I'm just trying to think different incidences that I know with people here. But
right.
They're really strict with the HIPAA laws. Not allowed to discuss anything. It has to be in front of the patient. My father was in the hospital a few years ago for something, basically minor, and I had to, sneak the file to make sure they were telling us everything, because it seemed like they were hiding. And I ended up, seeing my mother would be watching as I'm sitting there with my father there, the patient, and hiding it under the blankets when they would come in, and then got caught naturally when they went into the little drawer looking for it, and realized, oh, it's not there. You have to, give it here, and in front of him, even though he was the patient, and it was being read in front of him to him. I got scolded by the hospital staff for reading it because of HIPAA laws, and it doesn't concern you, and you're not allowed to do that. So for them to have told you, it is
right.
Surprising.
Well, what's interesting is, and I do give a lot of props to the Providence Holy Care teams that they had. They were very forthright, but I also was very persistent in asking questions. I was persistent in asking all of the specialists, and what was amazing is there was a number of the specialists would be sitting out in the hallway at the computers, and they said, no, come on out. Let me show you the results. Because we were keeping tallies on all of his bilirubin levels, on his insulin levels, on everything. And they're like, here, let me show you. The nurses would like, here are the results. Let me show you. And it was kind of like I had carte blanche. I didn't sit and read. Well, actually one actually stepped aside so I can sit and read the results. So I really give the staff there and their philosophy at that hospital big props for that. It made what I was going through much better. Not only did they let the data be shown, but just their very caring attitude. I had a kind of an emotional breakdown in the hallway dealing with a family member. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I turned around, and one of the attending nurses, who wasn't even one of Don's nurses, but knew me because I was living on the floor, came up and just wrapped me in a big, huge hug. And come on, where do you get that in any other hospital?
Right.
Yeah.
Couple questions before we jump ahead.
Okay.
This is, to help people that might be going through this or know somebody that is. What would you say to somebody, like somebody comes up to you, now that you've been through this personally, a friend or even a relative, they get a diagnosis similar to what Don had, and they're letting people know, or their friends and family know, I'm dying.
Yes.
What do you say to somebody that tells you that? You can't very well, if they're breaking it like that, they know there's no other there's another outcome is highly unlikely. So what do you say? To stand there and say, maybe they're wrong, maybe you're not. What you do?
You end up saying these words, this fucking sucks.
And because that has to be, there's some people that can't deal with.
What's that?
There's some people where when they're being told somebody has passed, they don't know what to do to comfort the person, because saying I'm sorry doesn't seem like enough. Like, you're sorry, okay, yeah, you're not going through the pain of
right.
the loss.
It goes back to just acknowledging the pain of There we go. We're back again. I don't know what you caught the last bit.
Hey, Holly, could you do me a favor? Let's just leave your camera off for a minute, see if we can save a little bandwidth.
Okay. Do you want me to turn the camera off?
Yeah, just leave it off. You're
okay.
fine. You're fine right now. You don't have to touch anything.
Got it. Thank you.
We didn't catch any of that.
Okay,
with what you say to the person coming to you saying, I'm dying, I only have X amount of time, and the saying I'm sorry to somebody who's lost a loved one just doesn't seem enough, and that makes people uncomfortable sometimes, because you don't know what to say, how to comfort. You can't bring the loved one back, but being confronted by somebody being told they're dying, that would be a little bit more uncomfortable. So, from you having gone through all of this, how do you handle it? You there?
We're getting her back right now. I'm thinking Don is making his presence known on Skype.
I believe it. Yes, he is. You need to tell him to knock it off.
Exactly. Come on, Don. This is another thing. Don hated to be talked about. He really hated picture taken, and he hated to be talked about. So I'm actually not really surprised. Okay, so going back to what you were saying about somebody being told that someone's dying. What I've learned, a couple of things, is I need to graciously accept their grief
All right, Don, you set this up and arranged it. Can you, like, stop cutting it out?
Sorry, I'm back again. So basically, to continue, so listening to other people, I let people grieve however they want to grieve in front of me, and that's been interesting. But I really wish people would just acknowledge the fact that what I was going through really freaking sucks. And just acknowledge the pain that I'm going through. Just acknowledge that it's the toughest situation ever, and they may never understand it. And please, for all heaven's sakes, give me a freaking hug. You know, because I'm a huggy person. There really isn't anything to...
Till we get her back, I know her and I had discussed and touched on it a little bit, where the people saying, I'm sorry. She had comment to me about, you know, the thing that came to her mind whenever she was told that is, sorry, you're not the one that gave him cancer. You're not the one that caused any of this, so what's there to be sorry about?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Misha. I hated the words I'm sorry, because that implies that they were to blame. And there's no one to blame. Don couldn't even be blamed for getting pancreatic cancer. Could a drug caused it? Maybe. We don't know. That research is still out. Waiting to hear back in a class action lawsuit.
Really?
But yeah, I would prefer people never say the words I'm sorry to me ever again.
Right. Right. So now, you know, we want to touch on as much as we can and, you know, talk more in detail next week because we're running out of time. As you said, everybody handles grief and the mourning process different and what they don't do. And that's where you find lots of times a lot of people become judgmental because they feel people should be crying their eyes out, or if they're crying their eyes out, you hear people saying, oh, what a drama, and putting on a show and, you know, going overboard with the grief, you know, when they're at the funeral and things. Or, you know, different personal beliefs. And you can't have you can have your personal belief, but until you go through it, you don't even know for sure how one is going to react. Are you there?
Getting her right back, Misha.
All righty. And, you know, that's one thing that's, and, you know, we all do it or been around people that do it when we're at viewings, at the cemetery, the get-togethers afterwards, the little, you know, gossiping that goes on. Did you see how acting? Did you see the drama or the no tears and stone cold and the comments and the wondering and until whether it's with a death or anything else in life, until we personally go through that situation, we have no clue that we would even follow the guidelines that we think should be followed. You made a lot of changes pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, I have.
A lot of people, you know, that I have run across, they want stability after losing a spouse, you know, especially a spouse. If they were planning on moving, maybe prior to the passing of the spouse, no, I gotta stay here in the house that we were familiar with, that we lived in, for whatever reason. Memories, they think it'll help their healing of their grief, whatever. But you made a decision right off you're not going to go back to work. You're done with the job that you had, for one, which is a big move because, you know, you're talking, you know, anybody to do that, their first thought is a death. I've lost half the household income. Now is not the time for me to quit a job or think about leaving. You need, people want stability.
Right. And I, you know, after Don died, as I told you before on our phone call, my life went into overdrive. And there's one thing I learned in all of my studies is when to recognize that I'm going with the flow and that the universe is providing me things that I need. And when Don, well, after that I also figured out it was Don. But I also figured out when I'm forcing the issue or I've got unrealistic expectations. So in all of my training, I really just let it go. I let everything happen for a reason. And I got back to work a week and 2 days after Don died, after visiting June Mountains and having a healing experiences there. I got back, found I really couldn't do the corporate gig anymore. It was so foreign to me, and it ticked me off so much how petty it all seemed, that they wanted to increase revenue by an heavenly amount of money, an insane amount of money, and it just was all about the money, and I couldn't do it. I quit within, I gave notice about a week later. I negotiated an exit strategy, and I left. And the moment I made the decision to leave, I actually had an interview later that afternoon for another job.
Did you?
I did. And so it was one of those really, that was another one of the many things that I'm like, okay, I'm just going to keep following my instincts, keep following what the universe keeps providing out there. And I've had and still have today was a massive amount of snowball of activity. When I decided I was going to do my freelance writing and editing business, people came out of the woodwork. When I, and this was recently posted on Facebook as of yesterday, I'm in a new relationship with a man, and believe it or not, I've got some possibilities because of the friends that he has. It just has grown exponentially of the possibilities of what I can do making money, more so than it was if I was to stay in that job. And I get to do what I love with people that I love, doing things for companies that actually have an amazing ideals, work ethics, and products that I can actually get behind and believe in. So I just keep going with the flow. I keep thanking the universe every day. I keep working with Ganesh, the remover of obstacles, and the patron god of writers. And I can't just keep working hard.
And kudos to you for just doing what you need to do and not worrying about what everyone else is going to think.
You know, occasionally I do have some hesitation, like coming out that I am seeing someone now. It is, according to the Western world, I should be in mourning for a year. I should be wearing black. I should be crying at every memory, at every turn, at every corner. You know what? I don't have time for that. I'm 41. I am a vibrant person. I have a lot of things to give to the universe, and now's the time to do it. I've wasted way too much of my life until now, and I'm done. I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to do what needs to be done, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some social norms or some critics in the community keep me back.
And that's what we all should do, what we need to do instead of what we think is expected.
Right.
Why do you think, Holly, that because we're running out of time and I have to finish up and continue in more detailed info next week. Why do you think some people find it so hard to get out of the mourning and grieving period?
Because of one word, should. They think they should be grieving. They think that they should be feeling horrible, that they should not let this person go, that they should be holding on to all of this, and that if they let it go, then they're letting somebody down, whether it is the person who passed or whether it's their friends, relatives, whatever. They're following the word should, and that's an external assumption of expectation. That's not being in touch with yourself. That's not really analyzing what you need and what you want. And you can hear I'm a little frustrated with this because it ticks me off when people allow those constraints to define their life. And I refuse to let that define my life.
Right. Yeah, do you think that some people just, I don't know, they just hold on so much because they can't let go? Not everybody can let go, even in breakups.
You know what? I haven't let Don go. He's still with me here. I still embrace him daily. I still embrace all the memories daily. I do not compartmentalize that. I accept there will be days that I will grieve. And there'll be days that I laugh, and there'll be days that I'll be like, oh, Donald Michael Kraig, why did you do this? Right. And I accept all of that as my process. And I find it extremely healing.
Yeah, you have to go through the different steps and emotions. Now, getting back to that, and how about Don? Did he go through an anger phase, blaming doctors or whatever?
Yep, there was one particular doctor he seemed to like to yell at because she didn't answer his questions clearly. He just wanted a yes or no answer to something, and she wouldn't answer it. And she didn't understand how to communicate with him. Eventually they figured it out. But yeah, he got angry at her. He got angry at really the universe, and I think really frustrated with his body. And I think he was really disappointed that his body let him down.
That's how he saw it. His body let him down.
Absolutely. You know, having diabetes wasn't necessarily a limiting factor until he got cancer. And it really upset him. He really worked hard to eat well, to exercise, to lose the weight. And everything he did.
Now, you mentioned earlier when you're not having a phone issue now because we're not really talking about him. We're talking about you and what you're going through and you're staying connected.
Right.
What do you mentioned earlier about possibly a certain drug could have caused if it's being looked into.
Yes.
A medical drug, and if you can't discuss it, that's completely understandable, you know, legal-wise, whatever might be going on.
No. His endocrinologist, who is an amazing doctor, Dr. Flor Giola, she's out here in Los Angeles. She was doing research when she had heard about Don's diagnosis. She started doing some research on the medication. Actually, I take that back. She had been at a conference where the conference had stated certain medications, and honestly, I'm not hiding the fact of what they were. I just can't remember what they're called off the top of my head, and I don't want to say the wrong drug. Has the possibility of causing pancreatic cancer, including the kind that he had. And what she did, she proactively pulled together all of his lab work, all of his results of tests and everything, and sent it to the manufacturers and stated, this man has this kind of cancer, yada, yada, yada. So my name has already been rolled into the manufacturers, but my name and Don's name has also been rolled into potentially a class action lawsuit against the companies for the drug. If anything happens, I'd actually be surprised.
Right. You never know.
Exactly.
We are running out of time. I knew that was going to happen, so I'm so glad I was able to get you 2 weeks back to this.
Yes.
People loved Don.
Yes.
And it was as true as the person as he was that I stated earlier in the show, his fans were that true as well, their love for him.
Everywhere I've gone, they just are so overwhelmed with that he's gone, and just so sad that he's gone. And I'm fortunate to be there to help them through the grieving process.
Let's end the questions with a teaser question, shall we?
Sure.
I'm sure inquiring minds out there are curious. Is there any written materials that he never got published in the works that we can be looking forward to in the future being published?
I am so excited to say, yes, there is. His life culmination work. It's a Tantric book. And some people out there know that he was actually a Tantric late in life. And I am actually going to be we're still working out the details with Llewellyn, but I will be working with Llewellyn to get that book published. And at the moment, I am slated to be one of the co-authors on it. So I will make sure that what Don wrote and the integrity of what he wanted to teach is going to be maintained. And we're looking to get this done as soon as humanly possible.
And when that time comes, I'll have you back so you get the promotion for it and discuss it in detail.
I would totally love that, Misha. I'm so proud of the work that he did, all of it. But this Tantric book is just amazing. Our wedding ceremony, oh, by the way, is in this book, as well as the funeral service that I will be doing for a memorial service and a date to be named later.
Okay, we will just touch on all of that next week, and we'll take the phone calls next week as well.
Great.
Thank you so much for doing this and having the time. The timing was perfect with what you have upcoming and all, that we were able to schedule you right away.
Yes, I am so honored and humbled that I could share all this with you, and thank you so much, Misha. I appreciate it.
The thanks goes to Don.
Yes, thank you, Don. Thank you, Don.
I know that. Just the way, just real calm and get a hold of Holly. Okay. On that note, we do have to end tonight's show. Both weeks, this week and next week, are dedicated to Donald Michael Kraig. Wish we could continue, but you'll have to tune back and join us next week, and you'll be able to personally speak to Holly then when we open the phone lines. Everybody have a safe, fabulous, wonderful week, and we'll see you all back same time next Wednesday. Good night.